for a tea break or something, which is very nice, but I can't give the lecture outside. It's very easy. We can do something anyhow. But I've got security, and security is now on its way. Meanwhile, I might as well do two things. First of all, put this on. Oh, look, that's what I was meant to be talking on today. That's what I've mapped out. And I've got handouts for each of them. You can make it nice and shorter to fit it in. Have we a gentleman in front? We have. What's that job cool set? No.
Teacher, Paul.
One for everyone in the audience.
Give me half one. Well, I wouldn't ask him to do anything. There's only one for everyone. I was going to ask for the second one. Now look, don't be lazy. Don't just give out a handful and give them out. Say, pick your own. You've got about 10 there. Here, give it below.
Thank you.
Give them out. You can keep your one and half an hour they don't give that's still lazy. We get in there. Here, come on, give me those back, please. When you stand up,
Jesus, this is a terrible fucking schoolmaster. Who's going really fucking perfect? Keep on for lean.
I do it quick on myself. I know you're not getting that.
Let's get you nowhere.
Now, hold on to me.
You one of those second sheets? No, because we did 8 seconds, but I took it. There's another kid, one after me there.
You stole yours.
On the book.
I know.
I would expect any better.
The ration.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, that's what I'm meant to be talking about. The first bit is early monastery. It's all in the hand. Right, it's all in the hand. It'll be quite easy, quite quickly to get that. Then we have a break. Early manuscripts is going to be a rush job. Nice picture show, but you're bound to do it. You might as well do it properly. Now, I think you're down just to do, and I'm not terribly sure what you're down to do, whether it's just the Book of Kells. I don't think you can do just the Book of Kells. I don't think it's fair to ask anybody just to do the Book of Kells, but I think it leads up to the Book of Kells. And I do that, and then I do the Tower. I think I'm down just to give just the Arda Chalice. No bloody way am I going to do just the Arda Chalice. You have to know something also about the Tara Brooch and the Dermot Landlord. Put them into context. Now I know that it would be nice to do them in detail and spend, like I have with the ordinary students, I think 6 lectures or 5 lectures of the Tara Brooch alone and 4 lectures of the Arda Chalice alone. But we haven't time, we have to do them in an awful rush. So I'll do them with you. So what I've done now in this case, and I hope everyone I know hasn't yet got handouts, I have 2 each in this lecture. One giving you the method you would recognize in ancient Irish monastic size. If you haven't got it, hold up your hands. Latecomers, I know, I saw you come in late. The other one is background information for the whole lecture, for the whole course, if you like. It's background information. I will also have something on the books and something on I hope they are a chalice, but I won't have every. Has everyone here got one? Oh, you haven't? Well, who hasn't got one? Look, keep your hand up till you get one. And when you get it, you got the lot. Where's the one more?
I'm stuck for Mark.
You get it?
I know, yeah. Oh, there's intruders, there's no doubt. Yes.
If anyone has got two, give them back because I haven't got any more. Has everyone who has got this one now?
Do you get this sort of thing when you're lecturing?
What?
Do you get this sort of shift when you're lecturing?
If I was quoting an hour like there'd be nobody there.
This is a daytime class too, there'd be nobody there.
Yeah. So far, see. So far.
And the pay for themselves.
That's right. That's right, not the parents.
No wonder.
Who's gone? An allied. He's in one door, not the other. Saturday was miserable, wasn't it? Miserable weather. Miserable. No, it was good though. I just enjoyed it.
It was interesting, yeah.
Very good.
Now everyone should have two handouts. You have them. Now if I can look, sir. I'm doing my best. You can always blame Mr. Moylan or some other fellow who mucked up there. He's probably got about 3 of each, bringing them home for kids, you know. Now I note that it's just been opened quietly without any noise. It's opened, which is not bad. I want to also push this on in case anybody is interested. There is, those of you who insist on sitting on the back, I might add, you'll get away with this lecture. If you want to see details in the Tower Brooch or details in the Book of Kells, I'd advise you sit as close as possible. They get about 100 times the original size, but you still won't see them at the back. The same goes, I'm sure, for that. I don't know how well you're able to read it, but there is a point in sitting up close, not just to be difficult or anything. It'd be better, and certainly it also leaves the place at the back for latecomers coming in who appreciate having an empty seat up there. Don't you, Mr. Moore? Right. It was taken up by all the slags, you know. You wouldn't think much of it. Now, that is a conference or a workshop, as the big word is nowadays, for something that happened 1,000 or 500 years ago, when, as you perhaps will hear tonight, but you probably know anyhow, of half the ordinary day students in these ignorant youngsters who didn't learn the general history at school don't know. And that is all about the Synod of Whitby in 664 and the Irish monks in Northumbria having a row with the locals about the celebration of Easter and coming back, as you know, to settle in Mayo, first of all in Inishbofin and then Mayo, where they founded Mayo na Saxon. It's now called Mayo Abbey, but it's Mayo na Saxon, which is Mayo of the Saxons, as you see. And a lot of interesting stuff has been found there recently. And also from Mayo na Saxon, various excursions, if you like to put it. In other words, some monks headed south, including to a place about 4 or 5 miles from Athenry, called Ty Saxon, the House of the Saxon, T. Saxon, and also farther south down to a site, Berrahead's Kyle in the Glen of Aherlow, and Tullylease in Slavin. Tullylease is called after one of them, Berrahead, in County Cork near Drumcollogher, in the Cork River border. So there's quite a lot, and that workshop is interesting. It begins at 10 o'clock with coffee and things like all good conferences. Registration and coffee, yes. And then it follows with lectures by people. Among the speakers and chair people are some very important people. It's about 8 or 9 people coming from Northumbria, especially for this, and 2 or 3 people coming from Scotland because of Iona to this. And you could do worse if you're anywhere in the Mayo region, Morris region, to come to it. Having said that, Governor Anno Mutter, as they say, come back to our mutton and get down to what we should be. I've given you those handouts. I don't know. Sorry, I don't know if.
Take the name like down small.
Say that again.
You reduce those at
I'm going to. I haven't started talking about that yet. I'm a professional.
Oh, I know.
Thank you.
I'm aware.
I don't know if you get handouts or have got any handouts yet, and I don't know what you got. I have a feeling you did get something. It's probably all about ancient monuments and prehistory and God knows what, and nothing about, I would say, yet about the earliest. I have a feeling you might have, I may have insisted that got into it, the dates and terms of the different periods. Now, is there a page with dates and the monuments that occur in that certain period? No. Ought to have been. Well, I'll have a look into that the next break.
Yeah.
What it is.
You want one out, all right?
Well, there may be some. But I have given you these things, and I don't know whether you get handouts or not, but I only have you for the one night so far. Might be as well. We probably will prepare some kind of handout for you, bigger booklet. Probably charge you £1 or something.
We've had 2 of them.
£10 worth. Two what?
2 handouts.
Like single pages?
No, quite large things.
I'd like to see them if you have anybody has them afterwards, because I'll have a look. Because it's not fair. I could be making those handouts with you already, could I? I'll have a look at them afterwards. Let's get back to what we're talking about, early monasteries. Now, early monasteries in Ireland are recognisable by many ways. And what I want to try and tell you is how you would recognise them by going, if you found yourself in the field, suddenly stumbled across something ancient and said, how would I know an ancient monastery? And that's the important thing. How would you say, this is an ancient monastery, not a ring fort, for instance? And you might find that it's not quite as simple as you might think. Would somebody come down and take handouts here. Doesn't matter. You have a list in front of you here, and that's straightforward. I can't go through the whole lot, but I'm going to show you just what the principle is and deal largely with the vallum. Now, the vallum is only the Latin for wall, as you know, or for one of the words. The word fama comes from it, of course. And a monastic vallum means a monastery wall. Now, in Ireland, quite unlike the monasteries, the early monasteries elsewhere, which have rectangular enclosures, in Ireland we have circular enclosures. Well, why? Well, one of the reasons, and it's in that handout I gave you, one of the reasons why we are so different in Ireland for everything after about 200 or 300 AD, why we're so different from everywhere else, is because the Romans never came. And because the Romans never came, we retained a lot of our earlier pagan Celtic features. When St. Patrick did come, he Christianized the country, fair enough, but he didn't change it all that much. He had to come cap in hand. He couldn't come with the Roman army behind him, saying, okay, you do this and you do that. You are now going to be Christian whether you like it or not, and we're destroying your ancient pagan sanctuary. He didn't do that. He couldn't. He had to be nice. And he was nice, and his friends were nice. And they Christianized a lot of the pagan sanctuaries, and indeed, they Christianized a lot of the pagan features, like, for instance, holy wells. The ancient Celts, we know, worshipped at sources of water. We know that they considered springs and other such even ponds and things sometimes as sacred places of worship. And indeed, on the continent and elsewhere, deep wells or source, the beginning of springs where the River Seine begins, for instance, and other such places, which are full of devotive deposits put in by the pagan Celts. In other words, quite evidently, these are sacred. Up at Auernmacha, which is one of the royal sites of Ireland, now called Navan Rath, outside Armagh, where the Crahor MacNassa and all these other warriors of Ulster lived. Outside it, there's a small lake called Loch na Shade, in which was found, I think 7, they've only one left, 7 to 9 actual huge big horns or trumpets of bronze, obviously a sacred deposit. So that's just an example. In Ireland, these were Christianized. St. Patrick and his friends came along, blessed them, and said, now, then you'll be cured by the good Lord, or Saint somebody. Later on, St. Patrick will do it, or St. Bridget herself was probably a pagan goddess. An awful lot of the Christian saints have pagan attributes, like Bridget. Bridget is one of the most famous pagan goddesses. Gives her name to the Brigantes and others, of course. So there's just an example. Now, why in Ireland do we have a circular enclosure? This is a sketch done for the National Heritage Park, which was built near New Ross, south New Ross, the ferry carry down in County Wexford. And although round towers are not features of early monasteries, I don't know if they're in that list. They are, yes.
Yeah.
But the reason that they're there, and they should be there, is that you get round towers, although most of them are 12th century, most of them are very late. None of them are, well, very, very few might be 10th century. Most of them are 11th and 12th century. So they're not part of an early monastery, but you only get them on early Irish sites, monastic sites. You do not get them in the later sites. So if you, on the non-Irish sites, the non-early Irish monasteries, monastic sites, so if you see a round tower, you may be sure it's on the site of an earlier so-called Celtic monastery. the Celtic Church. If you like to use something in inverted commas, we do use it quite often. And it means something a little different from the church everywhere else. Why? Because the church that came here with St. Patrick tried to set up a diocesan system. It didn't work. It couldn't work because of various things. You need a diocesan system, you need a centre. Where you'd have a cathedral, or where you'd have a central communal place. Ireland didn't have towns. And the king, apart from everything else, or the reed, the head of the tribe, could be the next successor, a second cousin who lived 40 miles away or 20 miles away. He didn't have to live in the same place. So the centre of power would keep moving, which made it very difficult for a hierarchical system to be instituted in Ireland. It didn't really work. So the Irish had an Irish answer to an Irish problem. They met up with the monks and who knew about monasteries in Syria and ancient Egypt and the Near East, and they adopted that type of monastic system in Ireland. The monastic system in Ireland is eremitical, which means everyone is a hermit, and each one lived in his own little cell. Later on, as you know, they all lived under the one roof. That wasn't in the 12th century, very much later. And in fact, the abbot, he had a general rule over a lot of them. The abbot was much more powerful than the bishop. He was the big shot. The bishop was kept. Any monk could be made a bishop. He didn't even have to be intelligent, so long as he was a bishop, because then he could ordain priests. That was the only purpose of being a bishop. Half the time. A lot of the abbots who were top guys, a lot of them were also bishops. No strange about that. So it's a slightly different concept than elsewhere. And it was introduced on the eremitical system from the Near East. And later on, when the church had a reform in the 12th century, they changed from a diocesan system to a hierarchical system, which meant that the order came very much Pope, Bishop, Priest, while at this stage it might be Pope, but it certainly was Abbot, monk, and the Abbot Bishop was somewhere in between. So you still have in the 12th century both types. It's just changing over, and in some of them, if we're around tower, it's a sign you're attached to the earlier so-called Celtic Church. Why were we different? Why did we never go the same way as the others? Because we got Christianity just at the last stage, and because of the reasons I've told you, but also because we got cut off from Rome to a great extent by the influx of barbarians everywhere except Ireland. The Huns, the Vandals, the Visigoths, the Franks, the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, the Frisians, called several names. They swamped the old Roman Empire. They never came to Ireland. So we got more or less cut off for a great length of period, which meant we didn't undergo a lot of change. So there is the reconstruction of a monastery, and we see a small church with several little cells where the monks would live, high crosses to mark the area of sanctuary, and circular enclosure around our village. Now, why is the circular enclosure? Everyone else had square enclosure, or rectangular. Why? Because the Romans, and everyone in the Mediterranean, the Arabs, they all went in for square enclosures. The Romans, as you know, built the castrum in a rectangle with straight roads going through it. They loved straight lines. The Celts, whether they were Irish or Celtic, preferred nice curves. So they stuck to round circles and enclosures like that. But is there an ancestry for it? There is, turn off that light. I can't find the way to turn it off. The one in front there. Yeah. There is a circular enclosure. A circular enclosure where the kings of the Ecoll, the Kinnail up there, Kinnail Connell, in fact, up in Green on a Valley, it is, and Inishowen held inauguration ceremonies in a pagan manner, by the way, right down to the 13th century, and in penal times, penal masses used to be set up here. So it does look like, well, I have reason to believe anyhow, myself, that just like Runangus and other sites, this is a circular enclosure. Nobody climbs up on top of the mountain and builds one of those to defend himself and starve because there's no water. There's the inside, and he's looking over everywhere. It is not a temple so much as a cult center. Now this is a pagan cult center, a pagan idea, Celtic idea, and there's other ones. You can call it Cashel, not Cashel, perhaps Cashel, but Stade and all the forts in Ireland, Anninclare, Ballykinbarriga. There's a lot of these forts. They all appear to be pagan ritual sites. But note, please, even at this stage, note one of the different types of steps up onto the terraces. And obviously, it looks like a fort. But when you're standing up there, you're not going to be able to see out. They could be coming at you, and you couldn't get near them. It's more an amphitheater, like the Colosseum. Think of it like that, and you'll see why I call it a centre where you look in, not where you're looking out. And that's one. Now here is another. There, on the island of Inishmurray, you have a similar site. All appearances. And that, indeed, when you look at it, look at the steps up to the wall. Now, that is, to my mind, clearly, or to everyone's mind, a pagan Celtic sanctuary, a pagan enclosure. Anyhow, leave it at that. We don't want to use the word sanctuary. And you want to look at it as a fortress, do. I won't go along with you. But if you want to think of it as a fortress, you can go and get in there if you like. And we just sit outside till you starve to death. Not a good place. Right. It's much better than a cult center. And there it is. When you look at the side, what do you see? This is what you see. There's the steps. You see a church and cross slabs. And well, we ourselves. You have an ancient monastic site. Now, what does that mean? It means that the monastic site took over the pagan sanctuary. So straight away, they didn't even have to build a surrounding area. They came into the middle of the pagan sanctuary. And indeed, you want proof, if you like, well, support for the theory that it's a pagan sanctuary. That's the altar. Now got a cross slab on it, one of many altars. And there's these stones, which are round. Some of them have spirals and things on them, some of them big crosses. They're cursing stones. That's not Christian. You turn them backwards and you probably say the Hail Mary backwards if you're able. But whatever it is, you curse somebody. And they're meant to work too. And there are cursing stones in many places in Ireland. Goes back to the pagan Celtic times. But there they are, in the middle of a Christian and early monastery. Now that's just one example. Here is another site from the air. A massive stone wall, another outer stone wall. Men from that strand was not there. And what's in the middle? Well, in the middle, the remains of a church. But you don't build that type of thing quite for just a church, a monastery. It looks, for all the world, like an ancient pagan site or cult center of some sort was taken over as a church site. There is trace of a round tower, there are crosses, there's sundials, and there's a trace of cells. Again, it's just an example. But when the monks came and began to build their own monastery, they began to build their own enclosures. In other words, they didn't always take over a pagan sanctuary. Probably half the time they wouldn't be given permission to. They had to ask permission. They just couldn't force them. And it's quite reasonable that if they want to persuade the people that a church site, a monastic site, or a church site, we have an ecclesiastical site, Christian ethos, if they want to persuade people that it is a sacred site, surely they will build an enclosure the same or similar to the enclosures on a pagan sanctuary. So it would have the same general effect. And it's only one step on instead of a jump. And so they made circular enclosures around their monasteries. And this is Kells, a reconstruction of Kells in County Meath. Believe it or not, there is trace of a circular enclosure there. And maybe like that. But they started building complete ones. And this is at Moyne, County Mayo, just a bit north of Shrewd, just in fact inside the Mayo border from Galway. And it's got a very massive circular wall. But I believe this one was not. This was built by the monks for to enclose their things. Not quite the same. It is thinner, though most of it is fairly modern, but it does look like it was built for a monastic enclosure. And there's dozens of these. Not always of stone, often inert, generally an earthen enclosure. In many parts of Ireland. While you're in the middle, you have an ancient church. It's not that old, it's only 1,000 years. But obviously it replaces a wooden one, and there's burials there in that area. And traces of banks where there were little fields belonging to monks. Hasn't been excavated, but this one has, and this one is at Kiltiernan, down the road on your way home to Ennis. Those you live there, you will pass this, and it's not far from our Graham. On the left-hand side going down, in the northeast to the road, in off the road, though you can, from the road. That's not the road. You can see the road, the main road there. From the road, you can actually see the gable of this church. But the church is clearly secondary, because the original enclosure around the church, the Holy of Holy areas, was in a different angle. The original wooden church excavation showed it was that general direction. But look, this was very high. It's not so prominent now, but you can still see where the circular monastic balance was, and the little fields and things associated with the ancient monastery. So there you have what the ancient monastery might look like, even if it's built on an island, like this, Church Island, which has been excavated by Professor O'Kelly. You've still got an enclosure, which in fact, you might say, oh, it has to be circular, because it's on an island and it can't make it square without running off the edges. It didn't have to be circular. And they did make it roughly circular, as you can see. And you can see the little churches here, and the little cells forward. It's a one-man church, so to speak.
Where is Church Island?
What?
Where is Church Island?
That particular one, there's two church islands, both monastic sites. One in Lough near Waterville, but that's not it. That one is near Begginish, near Carsavy. Now, what did the churches look like? I thought there was a good slide of drawing wooden churches with no. Well, what do we know about it? Not very much. We find posters, and we have wood with stone examples. But the early churches were all of wood, or nearly all. Darchach is what they're called, which is the word, of course, Dara meaning an oak, and Chach meaning a house. And the Darchach was the way they were built. As a matter of fact, St. Cian of Duleek is meant to be the first ever to have built a stone church. Now that's just tradition. But stone churches were rare, though in the west of Ireland you might get them. And of course later on they were all built of stone. Well, they weren't necessarily, but an awful lot of them were built of stone. But in the early stages they built out of wood. And do we know anything about them? Well, this is Christ on the temple from the book of Kells. And there is the temple, there is Christ. We know the square door, and they know the roof like that. And you notice these pieces here, they're called finials. They're on the gable. It's not a very good drawing of a church. Not much we have to go on. You do find this is a reconstruction of one church at one of these heritage parks somewhere. This one is St. John's Point, Church. And it's just a reconstruction of the little church. And you'll notice it really is based on MacDowell's Island, the one that's on St. MacDowell's Island off the coast of Galway. And it's a copy in stone of a wooden church. And they did, in fact, run up with ante at the edge, projections out which supported the barge poles up here, and you can see the poles going up and crossing one another at the top, like that. And they made them in stone. This is well-known. This is MacDonald's Island. You can see it has been restored by the Office of Public Works. This focusing thing isn't working at all. I'll get another one. The next selection will cut down and focus. There's the little church as you approach it, and when you get close to it, that's what it looks like. Now, I think they put another modern gable finish, and that is a modern copy of one that was now lost, been stolen, or just got buried or something, or broken. But it was, we have photos of it, and there's drawings of it done in the last century, and that one had to be made by Fergus O'Farrell from Dublin, who trains naturally, you know. But there is one of these little churches, and it's an early church. Actually, it probably is only 11th or 12th century, but it's the same type as early church. So, that was it's not working. We have one good description, I'll put it down, of the church from the 7th century. We have depended that to a great extent. It's the church of Kildare, which is described in the tripartite line of St. Bridget, and it's described by Contitosus in the 7th and 8th century. And I'll show you the drawing based, which I did many years ago, just a quick sketch, based on McAllister's description or drawing of it.
Having a slide.
Opened in ancient times.
That's it now. That's sketch. It's literally done on tracing paper, put between two bits of glass, and in a slide. Well, it's not working so well. But it's just based on the description we have in the 7th century of the big church in Kildare. And there you can see, because Kildare was difficult, it had monks and it had nuns. St. Conleth was abbot of the monks, St. Bridget was abbot of the nuns. And they were kept right up, and it may be explained by right down to today in places, and certainly until the last 20 or so years. You all should remember, in the country especially, people went in, the men sat on one side, the women on the other. Standard practice. And it's the same here. The women came in from their nunnery, and there was a dividing wall between them. No mixing. Bridget wouldn't have it. And the gnaw there, and here I wrote, well, and the men went in there, and there was an iconostasis. In other words, a division there. An iconostasis means a wall with a lot of icons. That's all it means. And St. Bridget was buried in a tomb there on that side of the altar, and St. Conleth on that side of the altar. Now, what's the last thing? What was this church like? We don't know. We don't know any more than that much description. And it would be nice to think that the partition between the monks and the nuns and the priest and altar, and by the way, the tombs were decorated in gold and silver and all the rest, very fancy according to the accounts, but the iconostasis or partition, which you do get even in medieval churches, I showed you in Athenry where the rood screen was, dividing the sanctuary, the choir and the chancellor from the rest of the monks. And I just took this photo. I got a photograph. Don't tell me that's not working now. Well, you saw it before, Dan.
Go back, I think it was before that.
I don't think it's working at all. Everything is staying on. That's going to that. This is a believe it. You saw the nice picture with all that. That was taken on a Greek church in Paris. Some of you may know, down near the Saint Jacques. There's a very nice little church there, near on the Rive Gauche. You know it.
I know where it is, I've been in.
But don't go to mass in it. I went to mass thinking it was a very handy. I'd get a mass next to where I was staying.
3 hours.
Rue de la Huchette. Went on and on and on and on. And they were all singing, they were all marching around the walk. It never stopped. It was lovely. But I didn't have 3 hours to spare. Now, if you have any questions, you ask me after or in the interval. I've gone over my time, but we did start late for reasons over which I had no control, obviously. And we'll come back and talk about the manuscripts. I'm sorry to give it to you in this rushed manner, but I hope you've enough in your handouts and enough from what you see and remember to take them down to be able to recognize